Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Welcome. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Pat King, a prominent figure of the Freedom Convoy from 2022, has been found guilty on 5 counts. We have the details. A BC MP spoke out in Parliament explaining how the carbon tax continues to hurt so many Canadians. And Glow Lethbridge is back at the Agri-Food Hub and Trade Centre. BCN's Heidi Echevarria will have all of the colorful and vibrant details.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. A prominent figure of the 2022 Freedom Convoy in Ottawa has been found guilty on 5 counts. A judge says Pat King is guilty of mischief, counseling others to commit mischief, counseling others to obstruct police, and 2 counts of disobeying a court order. He was found not guilty, however, of intimidation and obstructing police himself. King was involved in the 3-week demonstration against COVID-19 public health restrictions that gridlocked some of the streets in our nation's capital. Ari Goldkind is a criminal defense lawyer based in Toronto, and he says he was not surprised that King was found guilty on a wide range of charges. He does say, however, that if King spends any time in jail, Canadians should be outraged.
The one that I really thought he'd have trouble with was the disobey court order, which is that after there was an injunction to put an end to this, he was accused of and now convicted of basically saying, keep going, the hold the line kind of language. And the injunction was to stop honking the horns. And he was found guilty now of essentially saying, no, honk the horns when you see the police coming. I still think this is a total waste of time prosecution. I don't care that there were findings of guilt. Certain things have what's called discretion in our criminal justice system, that even if a conviction could come, it's not in the public interest to proceed. To me, this is pure politics and nothing more. He faces a maximum of 10 years in jail. If he even gets a day in jail, it will be a national disgrace. This is in a climate where perhaps more where I live than where your viewers live, where you have on a daily basis Hamas going all over, Hamasing, blocking traffic, blocking schools, intimidating people who have my last name, and they don't even get a ticket. So when you have a 2 or 3 week convoy where the charge was mischief, honking horns, if you see the police coming, do this and do that, okay, fine, he's convicted. But just because somebody is convicted or found guilty doesn't mean they should ever see the inside of a jail cell. And this is such a political circus that if he even gets 1 day in jail, Canadians should be even more upset than they already are with these prosecutions.
A British Columbia MP took issue with the Trudeau government's record when it comes to affordability measures. Central Okanagan MP Dan Albus says Canadians simply cannot keep up, especially with food prices skyrocketing 36% faster than the United States. He says more than 2 million Canadians are still headed to food banks to try and make ends meet. He also says the carbon tax continues to hurt a lot of people.
With 30% of food banks running out of food and 35% of Canadians feeling worse off financially, this government's appetite for a higher carbon tax seems to be the only thing that's well fed. Now, is the Prime Minister so desperate to cling to power he's resorting to tax tricks, sending people's pennies while he crushes Canadians every April 1st with moving towards a 61-cent a litre carbon tax? When will the Prime Minister realize his carbon tax coalition isn't just running on empty, it's running on fumes?
The GST and HST holiday break, which will kick in mid-December and last for about 2 months, should be permanent. Now, that's according to Franco Terrazzano, Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Terrazzano says Canadians are going to be angry when they'll once again have to begin paying taxes on food, diapers, clothing, and shoes once the break ends in mid-February.
So this tax relief is going to help now, fair enough, right, during a very financially stressful period. But in what world do politicians think Canadians will be able to afford to pay more on necessities on February 16th and afterwards, right? That's why this tax cut, which will provide some relief, must be permanent and must go further. Again, this government has been hiking so many taxes, which makes life more expensive, that not only does this tax cut need to be permanent, but it has to go much further.
Alberta's about to adopt a new auto insurance system. Premier Daniel Smith says we can expect rate hikes as our province switches to a no-fault claims model. Now, with the new system, those involved in vehicle collisions will not be able to sue the party responsible for their injury. Insurers instead would pay compensation at certain rates that are set out by the government. With cutting down on litigation costs, the province estimates that with the new systems in place in 2027, it could lead to savings of up to $400 a year for the average insurance premium.
It's no secret that the high cost of auto insurance is top of mind for Albertans. Many are struggling to afford insurance rates that seem to keep on rising. And the high and unexpected costs associated with getting into a collision could spell disaster for a family's finances. At the same time, claims and operating costs are also rising rapidly for the insurance industry. Both sides have been locked in a struggle to balance the need to cover costs with the ability to pay for them. It has been critical that we strike the right balance in making reforms to Alberta's auto insurance system. Over time, our new system will mean that the costs saved by not going to court will lead to lower, more stable and more predictable rates for Albertans.
Albertans can now apply for provincial funding to help with innovative housing solutions. Social Services Minister Jason Nixon says through Alberta's Affordable Housing Partnership Program, up to $150 million will be made available to help create more housing units and more than 300 shelter spaces in 15 communities.
Since 2019, Alberta's government has invested almost $850 million to build more than 5,100 units of housing and over 900 shelter spaces. Budget 2024 also committed to an additional $840 million over the next 3 years towards affordable housing initiatives, which will ultimately create more than 5,000 units. We also recently just announced another $112 million towards innovative interim housing solutions for Jasper residents who were impacted by the tragic fire in their community. We continue to see record highs in residential construction across the province as we aim to increase supply and stabilize the cost of market housing.
Well, we saw some snowfall across much of southwestern Alberta today, and the snow may get even a little heavier on Saturday. Jeanette Rocher is now with a quick peek at the forecast. Jeanette, it may be good to do lots of stretching before we head out to shovel.
Good point, especially since this isn't something that we've had to deal with in the better part of a year. Now, Lethbridge receiving 5 centimeters today, and more is on its way as we are under that snowfall warning, with another 5 centimeters expected this evening, and then another 10 to 15 expected tomorrow on Saturday. Overall, we're looking at 20 to 35 centimeters accumulatively throughout the whole region there. And, maybe think about postponing non-essential travel because keep in mind that visibility could be very much reduced due to this snow. Also be careful when navigating roadways, parkways, walkways, parking lots, as this could be very difficult with the excess snow and possible ice. So I will be back later in the show to tell you when we will be on the other side of this.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jeanette. Definitely stay safe out driving. As you've heard on BCN, voters in Lethbridge now have a date for the Lethbridge West by-election. It'll be coming up on December the 18th. Advance voting will be open on December the 10th. The two main combatants for the seat will be the NDP's Rob Miyashiro and the UCP's John Middleton Hope. Now, Middleton Hope ran into a bit of an issue recently where a number of his signs on the west side were taken down. He says he was not impressed.
At the end of the day, I sincerely hope this isn't malicious and this isn't somebody that has been put up to this. And I won't speculate as to who that might have been, but clearly he's not a Conservative voter. And I'm disappointed because, yeah, absolutely. Rob and I agreed that we would run a fair and clean campaign, and I'm going to hold him to it as I hope he holds me to it. I'm very disappointed that somebody would stoop so low as to be removing our signs just on day 2. You don't like the Conservatives, then vote against the Conservatives. At the end of the day, this is inappropriate behavior. It's actually mischief in relation to private property, so stop it.
John Middleton Hope stepped aside as Lethbridge City Councillor to focus on his campaign to run for the seat in Lethbridge West. You know, now that snowy conditions have arrived here, many recreational vehicle owners have begun the process of winterizing their RVs, but for some, it's their first time, and others, it can be a complicated process. BCN's Landon Hickok visited Skyline RV here in Lethbridge to discover what you should do when preparing your RV for the cold winter months ahead.
With the forecast now expected to hang below freezing from here on out, it's now the season to pack away your recreational camper or summer traveler, or however you prefer to use it. I spoke with the owner of Skyline RV Travel Center, who's been assisting customers for 47 years. And he and his son shared their knowledge in preparing RVs for the cold weather ahead.
So we're sitting in a motorhome today, a couple $100,000 motorhome. If it's not plugged in overnight, it'll freeze and do $25,000 damage. So we have to be very, very careful with these things. It's highly advisable to use an RV in the winter without water in it. And then if it gets cold, we're sitting in one right now that's really cold. If it had water in it, we would do all this damage. So in this case, it has no water, so it's just plain cold, but nobody's getting hurt. And that's a very common thing we recommend in this business.
So definitely some important things would be to research, look into what type of motorhome you have and what kind of fluid you have running through it. Because in a motorhome like this, we have a water tank and there's lines, water lines going to the sink, going to the water heater, all over the place. And if it gets cold, you're going to blow all that plumbing out. Units like this also come with diesel generator and various other power supplies that you can run your heat on, and that'll keep you warm throughout the winter.
Of course, it doesn't just apply to those storing them for the winter. There is a growing trend of people who find themselves living in RVs due to high cost of living. The owner of Skyline RV, Brian, says it's not something he's seen as much before, but similar measures still apply.
You know, rent can be over $2,000 a month. I had a couple earlier this year, 83 years old, and they financed an old RV for $400 a month because they couldn't pay the rent. We've had at least a half a dozen clients do that this year, and I pride myself and my family in being toy salesmen. But now we find ourselves being house salesmen for people that can't afford rent. And that's kind of a sad part of what we're doing now. We never planned the business to be that way. We like being toy salesmen. And so selling RVs for people to live in when it's 25 below it's problematic. It really is. And that doesn't mean people can't do it. They just have to have different preparations. And I tell people the best thing to do is not put water in it.
Ultimately, however, Brian says the best way to prepare for your RV for the winter is to just drive 1,500 miles south. For Bridge City News, I'm Landon Hickok.
That's some great advice. Well, December is coming, and with it, lots of snow, music, gifts, and of course, Christmas. Many in our community can once again enjoy Glow Lethbridge, which features thousands of lights all indoors. BCN's Heidi Echevarria went to experience all of the color and excitement that Glow Lethbridge has to offer.
For a second year in a row, the successful Glow Lethbridge is back to the Agri-Food Hub and Trade Center. This year, the very start of the Glow story begins with Santa's sleigh crashing and him looking for fun alternatives to continue his journey. The Director of Community Engagement with Lethbridge and District Exhibition, Paul Smith, talks more about this fascinating adventure.
Santa's sleigh has crashed and he's in bad shape now. So what Santa needs to do to make sure that toys get delivered around the world is visit different modes of transportation and make sure that he can get around. So as you tour throughout, you'll find trains and planes, hot air balloons, and a bunch of different surprises. And also as you're going through, you can collect and help Santa find his missing reindeer. You collect stamps, and at the end you have a chance to enter for a prize pack donated by the Movie Mill. So fun for all ages, and just kind of gives the storyline to Glow this year. Year one was such a huge success. The community told us that they loved it and they wanted it to come back. People are already starting to make it part of their holiday traditions. So we were excited to bring it back, but we said if we're going to bring it back, it needs to be different, it needs to be bigger and better. And so we've done that this year. We have a whole new theme this year. We have a whole new bouncy castle set up. We have a ride-on train, which is very exciting. So there are a lot of additional pieces to Glow this year that even if you came last year, you'll have a whole new adventure this year. And if it's your first time visiting, I know that you're going to have a great time. Well, one of the big things that we do have new this year, though, is our theme nights. And so if you are looking for a specific type of adventure or something more to do to enhance your Glow experience, we have everything from pajama parties and dance parties to nights where you can come and meet your favorite superheroes and princesses. We have a very special night with the Coca-Cola truck. Christmas truck is coming on Thursday, November 28th. So you can see that traveling attraction, which is in our city for the very first time. So we're excited to host that. We have a Glow After Dark event, which is an 18-plus adults-only event that it features a buffet dinner from LA chefs and a dueling pianos performance right here in the middle of Glow. Last year we had more than 20,000 guests came and visited Glow last year, which was an outstanding response from the community. Based on what we're seeing this year, we would expect that it's even more this year.
The bright and colorful Santa Slate Adventure is available from today until December the 31st. For Bridge City News, I'm Heidi Echavarria.
So much color and lights, I love it. The Social and Safety Standing Policy Committee here in Lethbridge has voted unanimously to recommend City Council to approve a new bylaw on animal care and control. A major element of the new bylaw includes restricting the number of household cats to 6 in order to prevent hoarding situations and ensuring wellness in the household. The city says, however, they would not pursue active enforcement to households that currently hold more than 6 if passed. A low-cost microchip program for dogs and cats would also be introduced next year, primarily to locate lost cats back to their owners and prevent them from keeping them in shelters. City Council is asked to give readings on the bylaw on December 10th and January 21st, and if approved, that bylaw will come into effect in May 1st of 2025. Well, Environment Canada issued a snowfall warning here for Lethbridge today, and the snow may be even heavier tomorrow. A full look at the weather pictures coming up. Well, we saw quite a bit of snow today in Lethbridge. Environment Canada, in fact, issued a snowfall warning for our region. Jeanette Roche is now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, the snow may let up possibly by Sunday?
Well, Sunday should be the day, Hal, but until then, maybe brace yourself and just tucker in for the next couple of nights because, as you said, a snowfall warning has been issued. So we're seeing 5 centimeters today. We're talking another 5 centimeters tonight and then another 10 to 15 centimeters on Saturday. So we're talking 20 to 35 centimeters accumulation in the next 24 hours or so in certain areas of the region. And then maybe on Sunday, once it's all stopped snowing, just take the kids sledding in the Sugar Bowl. That sounds like fun. Just make sure that you bundle them up really well because it's going to be even colder that day. So after we're seeing the -9 day on Saturday, it's going to get chillier, -13 on Sunday, -11 on Monday. And by that time, the snow is stopping. We're seeing clear skies on Tuesday, -2, finally back to normal. And then -7 on Wednesday. We could see a 30% chance of flurries on Wednesday, and then Thursday, -8. Okay, so as we're looking to the almanac here, the average high for this time of year, 2, average low, -9. 19 was our warm day. That happened in Lethbridge back in 1917, and in 1946 was the record cold on this day, which was -32. Sun rose this morning at 7:55, and we're looking at a sunset this evening at 4:40. 2 minutes shorter daylight than we saw yesterday, and that means 8 hours and 45 minutes of daylight today. Okay, in the national forecast, here's what we're looking at here. So windy conditions expected today and tonight with that fall storm hitting the island and the south coast. Tomorrow, 30% chance of showers, though. At Vancouver, that same system is bringing a snowfall warning to the Coquihalla Highway from Hope to Merritt. We're seeing 15 centimeters of snow expected in that area, but Vancouver looking at rain with 30 to 50 winds. And then Edmonton, also a snowfall warning expected of 10 to 15 centimeters, looking at a high of -12 tomorrow. Same thing for Calgary with the snowfall warning, 10 to 15 centimeters expected there as well. As we get over to Saskatchewan, a developing low pressure system over Montana will spread a large area of heavy snow across Saskatchewan on Saturday. So snow will begin by the Alberta-Montana border and spread to Manitoba border throughout that day. So 15 to 25 centimeters is expected there. In Saskatoon itself, though, 5 centimeters is expected in the city. Same thing for Regina. Both of those are under those snowfall warnings. -10 in Saskatoon, -9 Regina, -6 in Winnipeg with mainly clear skies. A little bit of sun and cloud by the end of the day there. In Toronto, we're seeing showers, 60% chance of those with 20 to 40 winds, high of 9 degrees, high of 7 in both Ottawa and Montreal, 30% chance of showers in the afternoon and also some drizzle there in the morning, and 40% chance of showers expected in Montreal tomorrow. As we look to Atlantic Canada, seeing a lot more rain, heavy rain, 5 to 10 millimeters of rain expected in Fredericton with up to 50 winds, 7 for the high there. Halifax, high of 10 degrees. Very heavy rainfall, 30 to 40 millimeters tomorrow, and then also a wind warning. So we're seeing up to 90 km/h winds along parts of the coast in Charlottetown. Also 15 to 25 millimeter rain, up to 80 winds there with high of 10 degrees and 6 for the high in St. John's tomorrow with 40% chance of showers. Fog patches dissipating and up to 80 winds there. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
Gains at supermarkets and other grocery stores sent retail sales up slightly in September to $66.9 billion. Stats Canada says sales at food and beverage retailers were up 3% for the month. Supermarkets and other grocery retailers besides convenience stores rose 3.3%, while beer, wine, and liquor retailers sales went up by as much as 4.4%. The advanced retail sales estimate for October suggests they increased 0.7%, though Stats Canada cautions the figure may be revised. Canada Post is reporting a third quarter loss of $315 million as the postal worker strike enters its second week. The Crown Corporation says the quarterly loss is up from $290 million lost in the third quarter of 2023. It says the losses were driven by an increasingly crowded and highly competitive e-commerce delivery market that continued to affect results. The tough financial results put Canada Post on track for another large loss this year, the seventh year in a row the Crown Corporation will be in the red. Now, here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was up 53 basis points of the day to 25,444. The Dow was also up 426 points to 44,296. The S&P 500 was up 20 basis points to 5,969, and the Nasdaq was also up 31 points to 19,003. West Texas Intermediate oil was up $1.14 to $71.24 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 21 cents to $3.12 US. Gold was up $38.40 to $2,710.50 US an ounce, and silver was up 34 cents to $31.26 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.27 per bushel, barley is at $6.35, canola is at $13.36, and corn is at $7.54 per bushel. Live cattle December contract was down $1.13 to $187.35. Feeder cattle were up 33 cents to $255.13, and lean hogs December contract was up 88 cents to 81.68. And the Canadian dollar was slightly down over the past 24 hours and currently sits at 71.50 US.
Recapping one of our top stories, a prominent figure of the 2022 Freedom Convoy in Ottawa has been found guilty on 5 counts. A judge says Pat King is guilty of mischief, counseling others to commit mischief, counseling others to obstruct police, and 2 counts of disobeying a court order. He was found not guilty, however, of intimidation and obstructing police himself. King was involved in the 3-week demonstration against COVID-19 public health restrictions that gridlocked some of the streets in our nation's capital. So what are the signs of diabetes type 1 and 2? What help is available for Canadians? Candice Akey is the Connections Manager of Diabetes Canada, and she'll have details for us momentarily in an interview with BCN's Jeanette Rocher. When you see news happening in your community, drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. Also visit our website anytime to check out a number of stories and interviews.
Most of us probably know someone who has diabetes, but do we know how it impacts them, and do we know what help is available, and if there are preventative measures that we can take? Our guest today is going to talk about this. Candice Akey is the Manager of Knowledge and Connection at Diabetes Canada. Candice, welcome to Bridge City News. Great to have you with us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, so how many people, well, let's just jump right into this, Candice. How many people in Canada actually have some form of diabetes? Because I understand there are different types.
Yes, there are. So as it stands right now, about 4 million people are diagnosed with diabetes in Canada. So that works out to about 10% of our population. And every 3 minutes, someone is diagnosed with diabetes. So it is, a disease that is progressing. There are about 6 million people who are at risk for developing diabetes. And about 90% of the people diagnosed with diabetes live with type 2.
Okay, can you maybe explain what diabetes is?
Sure, absolutely. You were right. There are different types. People who live with type 1 diabetes aren't able to produce their own insulin. And that's because their body is attacking the pancreas, which is the organ that produces insulin. So it's considered an autoimmune condition. People with type 2 diabetes can't properly use the insulin that's made by their bodies, or their bodies aren't able to produce enough insulin. And then we have gestational diabetes, which is a temporary form of diabetes that occurs during pregnancy and may increase the risk for developing type 2 diabetes later in life for both the mother and the child. And then you've also might have heard of prediabetes, which is a condition where blood sugar levels are higher than normal, but are not yet high enough to be diagnosed as type 2 diabetes. So, although everyone with prediabetes may not actually develop type 2 diabetes, many people will.
Oh, that's so interesting. Do we know what exactly causes it at this point?
You know what? That's a great question, and I wish I had a clear answer to that. There are many factors that come into play with diabetes. So, as I just mentioned, with type 1, it is considered an autoimmune disease. With type 2, there are many factors. There's definitely a genetic component. We know there's a behavioral component, and there's an environmental component as well. So, it's very complex. We know that there are many tools that we can use to support people living with diabetes, but a clear, one sort of type of cause is very difficult to point them.
Okay, so is it unfair for people to say that you can develop diabetes based on an unhealthy lifestyle then?
Well, yeah, in a way, because again, there is that genetic component. And
Yeah.
one thing I really want to make clear is that people who develop diabetes, it's not one single thing that they did or would have experienced necessarily, and it certainly is not their fault. So I would say that it's not a fair statement. We want to think about diabetes as a very complex disease with many different components that contribute to developing it, and as well as many different components that contribute to how it progresses throughout the lifespan.
Okay, so with that said, then are there some preventative measures that we can possibly take?
Yes. One thing that's really important is to know if you have a high risk of developing diabetes. So that's exactly what we're trying to do this month with Diabetes Awareness Month is make the time to learn about risk factors. And we do have a risk factor calculator on our website. So again, if you have a family history of diabetes, that kind of thing, you want to sort of look into that. So knowing what your risks are, that's a great time to start having conversations with your healthcare provider and getting your blood sugar checked to see if there are risks there, if you're trending towards developing diabetes, and then starting to make a plan that will help to reduce that risk and also manage any potential complications that may arise.
Okay, and how does this disease impact the health of those with diabetes? And are there some like what are some of the risks over time?
Absolutely, absolutely. So the risks over time is that as diabetes progresses, you're at a higher risk of developing longer term complications such as kidney failure, heart attack, and limb amputation because diabetes is a vascular disease. It affects the blood vessels. Many people with diabetes are also at a higher risk for developing mental health issues because of the stress of managing diabetes. We refer to that as diabetes distress. So as you can imagine, someone living with diabetes is never off the clock between measuring their blood sugar, calculating their doses of medication and remembering to take it, priming their insulin pump, for example, or educating their caregivers about what's happening with their disease. It really is almost like a part-time job.
Oh, sounds like it. It just sounds like it just becomes a part of your lifestyle. Like, absolutely. So, is there anything close to a cure then? Like, is there any promising research underway?
Yeah, there is research. So just to make it clear, there is no, at this point in time, there isn't a cure. And many people may think, well, insulin might be the cure, but it is not a cure to treatment. Diabetes Canada is funding projects, about 260 projects with different researchers, to really sort of look at some of these questions. As a matter of fact, we have funded 2 researchers, Dr. Remy Rabassa Lore and Dr. Ahmad Haider, who helped develop the artificial pancreas, which is an automated insulin delivery system. And this technology has really helped to reduce that mental load that comes with living with diabetes and increases the amount of time that people can spend in the right range for them for their blood glucose. And that really does help to improve their quality of life as well.
Okay, and I'm told that type 2 diabetes is controlled with diets and pills. Is that correct?
Not exactly. There really is no one size fits all approach with managing diabetes. Again, as I mentioned, it's a very complex disease, and it really depends on several factors. So, when someone is diagnosed, how long they may have had it prior to getting a diagnosis. That can affect how you treat it. We do know, obviously, that lifestyle behavior changes is a big component. It's just one tool in the toolbox, though. We want to think of diabetes as having many tools that you can use. So, lifestyle, healthy eating, physical activity are certainly some of those tools, but medications as well may be an important tool, again, depending on where you're at with your diabetes. We want to make sure that people have access to all the different tools that they have in their toolbox.
So it isn't so much controlled then with diet?
It certainly helps with managing your blood sugar. Absolutely, absolutely. But so do medications, so do physical activity, so does managing your stress and sleep. So yeah, absolutely, all those tools.
Okay, and type 1 diabetes requires insulin to be injected into the body, and some people still use those syringes, but are there maybe some more advanced and convenient methods available today?
Absolutely. So we do have insulin pumps, and this is an alternative technology to the multiple daily injections, as you were mentioning. And they're about the size of a pager, they're portable, and you can program them to deliver insulin based on the amount of carbohydrates that you eat and that kind of thing. Certainly, some people find that the daily injections are a better fit for them, depending on what their circumstances are. So it's not to say that they're still not a great option, but certainly we do have additional tools such as the pump and some pumps that do connect to their glucose monitors as well that can really help them take better control of their blood glucose levels.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's got to be nicer than poking yourself with needles every single day. That's a hard way to live.
It is.
Yeah, and I do understand that blood glucose testing is a necessary routine, of course, and there are a variety of methods that make testing easier than it used to be. And can you maybe explain what options are available and what kinds of costs might be involved?
For sure, for sure. So yes, as I just mentioned, we do have glucose monitoring systems. We have the glucometer, which some people, as you said, can prick their finger and measure their blood that way. Those are also becoming more advanced as well. But we also have continuous glucose monitoring systems, and that is where people might wear a sensor and they're able to get a continual read on their blood glucose. And what that's been shown is to really help keep their blood glucose levels within their own individual target range. And it helps to reduce life-threatening situations like hypoglycemia, which is low blood sugar, and hyperglycemia, where the blood sugar gets too high, and helps to reduce the risk of complications as well. All that to say, these things are very expensive. So Canadians living with diabetes may need to pay between $10,000 and $18,000 per year, and in some cases out of their own pocket for diabetes medications, these devices, and the supplies. So while this technology does exist, it's not necessarily accessible to everyone. And that's why Diabetes Canada is really active in advocating for increased access to these devices and supplies.
Yeah, you mentioned in there hypo and hyperglycemia. Are those a form of diabetes at all, or are they completely something different?
No, so this is what can happen with blood sugar levels when they are not being managed well, either through medication or through the lifestyle activities that we talked about. So hypoglycemia is when your blood sugar drops too low. As we know, the body uses blood sugar for energy, and your brain is the biggest consumer of that blood sugar. So when it drops too low, you're at risk for some very severe consequences, dizziness, fainting, and in some cases, seizures. So it's definitely something that we want to be aware of and manage if you live with diabetes.
Okay. What are the signs and symptoms of diabetes? What should we be watching out for?
Absolutely. Yeah. So things to look out for sure. If you have been diagnosed with diabetes or if you think you might be at high risk, is unusual thirst. So feeling very thirsty. And with that, if you're drinking lots, you might be urinating a lot as well. You want to look for changes in your weight. So either gaining or losing weight, extreme fatigue, lack of energy, blurred vision, cuts and bruises that are slow to heal, as well as any tingling and numbness in the hands or feet. So those are the symptoms that people can see. But oftentimes with diabetes, you may not have any symptoms at all. So often refer to it as a silent disease.
Yeah, that's scary. That's for sure. Because I mean, how many of us have had dizziness or tingling? I mean, now you're going to get us wondering. Go get checked out, right?
Yes, yes. And that's it, right? It's knowing if you have a risk for it and working with your healthcare provider.
Now, Candace, if someone has some of these symptoms, should they see a doctor right away?
They should. They should. The thing is, we know that sometimes access to our healthcare system can be a bit challenging. So we know that close to 1.8 million people live with diabetes in Canada and don't even know it. So it is something to pay attention to. The sooner you can get diagnosed, the better. And obviously, to work towards beginning to manage the condition. And this ultimately leads to better health outcomes. If you are experiencing signs or symptoms, please, seek medical attention, especially if there are those severe ones, such as blurred vision, feeling faint, those kinds of things. And if you have access to a healthcare provider, do make an appointment and have your A1C test done, which is a test that looks at your blood sugar levels over sort of a 3-month average.
Okay, so that's what the kind of test is that would be necessary to see whether or not you have diabetes.
Correct.
Interesting. So it's done over 3 months.
Yes.
Okay.
There are also testing that you can do where you fast and you look at your blood sugar levels after a fast as well. And there's also sort of impromptu blood tests that you can do to get a read what your blood sugars are at that moment. But the A1C test is really gives an idea of maybe how your diabetes has progressed if it's something that you're potentially facing a diagnosis with. It just gives the healthcare provider a little bit more information.
So what advice would you have for someone who has just been diagnosed with diabetes, especially if it's a child, because I understand children can get it as well?
Yes, they can. Yeah, so we just recently did a social experiences of living report, and we learned that nearly 90% of people, again, living with type 1 diabetes, and nearly 70% of people living with type 2 diabetes experience shame and blame around their diabetes diagnosis. So the biggest message that I would say is to remember that diabetes is not your fault. It's not that person's fault. There are so many misconceptions about this disease, and it's very complex, as I mentioned before. And even the treatments are complex as well, and they're different for everyone depending on the type of diabetes that you have. So the best advice I can do is, or I can say, is just to remember that it's not your fault. Take the time. That's what that Diabetes Awareness Month is all about. Is really about taking the time to learn and give yourself that knowledge to learn about how diabetes can be managed through the different tools that we have. And take that time to educate others as well through talking about it. That would be my best advice.
Yeah, and what kind of support is available for someone with diabetes? Is there a special website they should go to get that help?
Yes, absolutely. Well, of course, Diabetes Canada, we have a great website with lots of fabulous resources, and they're divided into different types, the different types of diabetes. So certainly come and visit our website at diabetes.ca. Also, you can learn a little bit more about our Let's Make Time campaign at diabetes.ca/Let's Make Time. And you can certainly give us a call. We have a 1-800 number, 1-800-BANTING, and we have staff ready to help you with your questions and direct you where you can find more information. You can also email us at info@diabetes.ca if that is works better for you, but we're certainly here to help.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for being with us today, Candace. Appreciate having you on.
Thank you so much.
Candace Acquis is the Manager of Knowledge and Connection at Diabetes Canada. If someone brought up the term Tourette syndrome, what kinds of things would come to mind? Most of us probably don't really know a lot about it, but today we are going to learn a bit more about this disorder. And Jerry Firth joins us from Lethbridge. He is the coordinator of the annual Trek for Tourette fundraiser, which just occurred a couple weeks ago in Lethbridge. So he's here in Lethbridge. Welcome to Bridge City News, Jerry. Great to have you on. And I understand that fundraiser took place at Legacy Park, and it was quite successful.
Yes, thank you. Pleasure to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit more about Tourette syndrome.
Of course. Okay, so maybe let's find out, first of all, what your connection is with Tourette syndrome. Is this something that you yourself have been diagnosed with, or perhaps someone close to you?
Yeah, our oldest child, who's now the age of, well, almost 17 now, was diagnosed with Tourette syndrome at the age of 6. Myself and our youngest child also have tics, which is the most common trait within Tourette syndrome, but it's a part of a host of what would be known as tic disorder. Neither of us have been formally diagnosed, at least not at this point. We also have other individuals in our life that we know that live with and are affected by Tourette syndrome.
Okay, so what kind of a disease is this, and what are the symptoms? You did mention the tics there.
Yeah, so Tourette syndrome is a neurological disorder, which means it affects the brain and other nerves within the body. So this disorder involves repetitive and involuntary movements movements and sounds known as tics. It's part of a group of tic disorders and is the most severe of these types of disorders.
Okay, so can you maybe describe what some of these various types of tics, what these symptoms sort of look like?
Certainly. So tics present differently for everyone. It can range on a scale of severity from minor to rather large and uncontrollable. Movements can be present in any part of the body. That would include the face, neck, arms, legs, and so on. It could include things like flinching, twisting, flinging, among other movements. The vocalizations could include things like humming, grunting, coughing, and vocalizing certain words or phrases. For example, with our child, humming is something that's quite present for them. And they also have various words or phrases that they might repeat. Um, they have an arm flinch that they do when they flick out their arm to the side. But of course, throughout um, the development of Tourette syndrome that they've been living with, their tics have changed and morphed. For myself, for example, I also have most of my tics happen in my face. I also have a bit of a shoulder roll or a shoulder shuffle. You might actually end up seeing that at various times within this interview. Um, and then when I'm often preoccupied with watching TV or something, I'll do a ticking noise with my mouth. And so, like I said, it's different for everyone and can look and sound different. And those tics can change throughout the lifetime.
Yeah, you mentioned the change there. Is this something that can gradually increase over time, or does it more decrease? Does it affect younger people more than older people? Do you grow out of it ever?
Yeah, good question. So it typically does change, and the more It's more common with children. People enter that adulthood can live with Tourette syndrome, but often it does decrease. And in many cases, it can actually even go away in time. That's not true for everyone, but I would say that it's more severe among young people.
Okay, all right. Now, we often see Tourette syndrome depicted in the movies as people who maybe like swear uncontrollably. That's kind of what it's known for. But how much reality is there to that?
Certainly, yeah. So movies and other popular media often depict Tourette syndrome on the higher end of severity. The uncontrollable swearing is often known as what's called, see if I get the term right, coprolalia. In reality, only about 10% of people impacted by Tourette syndrome display vocal tics that would consist of things such as the socially inappropriate cussing or swearing. This depiction, unfortunately, can be incredibly harmful and continues to provide the misconceptions of what Tourette syndrome is.
Yeah, no, for sure, definitely. Now, are people with Tourette's are completely aware of the tics that are occurring, or do they try to stop them from happening?
Yeah, I would say for the most part, there is some awareness. I would say specifically amongst the more severe tics, they're pretty hard to be missed by anyone, including the individual. There are times though where it becomes a bit of a normal function, and you may not acknowledge or recognize them, and others who are familiar with you also may not acknowledge them. And as I had mentioned earlier, that some of them can look like normal actions or behaviors by an individual, so they might go unnoticed by others and themselves. Unfortunately, though, some of the more severe tics can be quite uncomfortable and painful even at times. For example, our child has one where they thump their chest pretty hard, and that can be quite hurtful for them. So those types of tics obviously are ones that they're quite aware of. But like I said, they are uncontrollable and involuntary. So um, there are times that you can work to try to suppress them, but that can be very difficult for most.
How common is this disease, and does it impact one gender more than the other?
Sure. Uh, so tic disorders. So Tourette syndrome is a part of a group of tic disorders, and tic disorders affect about 1 in 100 children, and Tourette syndrome is more around 1 in 160. It tends to affect males more than females. I think it's a 3-in-1 ratio to a 4-in-1 ratio, somewhere around there. Um, uh, and it shows up and presents differently amongst males and females in some ways as well.
Interesting. Like in what way?
Just with regard to well, when it presents itself, males typically end up presenting a little bit earlier in life than females, and um, there are more prevalence with some of the motor tics.
I understand. Okay. What age group does it typically affect? I know you've mentioned you've got young kids even that have it. Does it usually start pretty young?
Yeah, so the first signs of Tourette syndrome usually occur between the ages of about 5 and 10. Now, they can occur as early as the age of 12 or even later, up to the age of 18 is when you might still first start seeing tics occur. They usually start out pretty mild in nature, often with the head, neck, or face, and then later present throughout other parts of the body, and the severity can increase over time as well. But yes, usually in younger ages is when it starts, and and as I mentioned, you can eventually start to grow out of them, and most people do, whereas they might live with it for their life.
Wow. Do you know how many people have been diagnosed with this in southern Alberta or in the Lethbridge area?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think there's any stats available for this particularly, at least nothing that I could find that was accessible. But if we can imagine 1 in about 160 children being affected, I'm not sure exactly where we are with the population of children, but at 100,000 plus people in Lethbridge, I would say there's probably 300 individuals that are likely affected or living with TS.
Wow, incredible. So what do we know about the cause of Tourette syndrome? Is it genetic, or can the environment around us sort of contribute to it?
Certainly. Yes. So the exact cause itself is unknown. They continue to do research around this area and have not yet found any direct correlation. There are both genetic and environmental effects that then can play a role with Tourette syndrome. We do know that it is pretty common within families, so genetics do play a role, and it can be intergenerational. Now, with it, because there's no real understanding of the cause, there's also currently no cure for Tourette syndrome. However, there are certain treatments that can include things like medication, relaxation techniques, and psychotherapy.
Okay, well, that at least brings some sort of relief, hopefully. Is Tourette syndrome in any way associated with ADHD or OCD?
Yes. So it's actually, well, the term would be that's often used as comorbidity, but certainly Tourette syndrome is often accompanied by any of those other neurological disorders, whether it be attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, oppositional defiance disorder, or OCD itself. And so each of those might create new dynamics or have different effects or impacts on how TS might be present, and then also create some other complexities and complications as a result.
Wow. Obviously, it has impact on the individual themselves, but what about what type of impact would it have on the family unit?
Yeah, certainly. So again, I think it would often depend on the individuals who are affected by Tourette syndrome and how the other neurological disorders that they might experience would impact their lives. This could have an effect on behavioral attributes, academics, social behaviors, etc. So it would very much depend on many factors in that way. Um, but I think that a lot of the challenges that come with it is because it's such a misunderstood diagnosis that there's also often a lot of social stigma. Plus, there's also minimal resources available to individuals and families affected. With that social stigma that exists as well, it can also feel like often an isolated experience for the individual and families. Um, and so, uh, again, it would range, but I can speak from our family experience. It's been an incredible journey of many highs and lows, and some often very difficult conversations and some difficult interactions and engagements, both with our child and ourselves, but also with the professionals and other resources that we try to interact and engage with, often trying to explore pathways for the success of our child.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, I'm sure it hasn't been an easy road for sure, but hopefully it's brought you together a little bit closer as a family.
In many ways, it has, especially around us taking on a lead in coordinating the Trek for Tourette. It's something that when we first started as a family, shortly after our child was diagnosed, it gave us a sense of community where we weren't the only ones that were living with a child affected by TS, and also help us to better just explore and have conversations about what does it mean to live with TS, and have conversations with others in our lives as well, our family and friends, about what that might look like and mean.
Right. Speaking of which, is there, like, what type of help is there out there for kids who struggle with self-esteem from this stigma surrounding TS?
Yeah, certainly. So there are some professional supports that exist locally. Of course, there's some common things around accessing counseling services. We are fortunate enough to be able to have access to that with our child at a very young age. through AHS, Child and Youth Mental Health Supports. There's also a local physician who's a pediatrics neurologist, and then we also have access to a psychologist, a psychiatrist. And so a lot of those professional supports have been wonderful. We have looked at and explored other potential supports in Calgary at the Children's Hospital there, where they have specialization in Tourette syndrome. But of course, the travel it imposes its own challenges. But of course, we've been fortunate as a family to be within schools that have been incredibly helpful and supportive. However, again, with the Tourette syndrome being rather misunderstood and just unfamiliar for most people, that the school setting has probably been one of the greatest challenges to try to explore and navigate.
Yeah, I can imagine. With that said, any advice for schoolmates as to how to respond or interact with a fellow student who might have TS?
Certainly, yeah, and I appreciate this question. So our child, shortly after they were diagnosed, we encouraged them to share about what Tourette syndrome is and what it means to them and how they live with it, so that there can be this familiarity with it. Really, I think if anything, it's important that people understand that the movements and vocalizations are involuntary. Most people who are living with TS struggle with the perception when they might be seen as being interruptive. So I think it's important not just for the classmates, but for the teachers to also know that there's no intention in that area. And there are things that can be done to help in those situations. One, not just the understanding, but also sometimes stress can induce tics. So if a student is struggling in a setting and tics are being set off by their stress levels, to just provide another space for them, perhaps some quiet space for a while. Also, maybe make some accommodations so that they're able to do some learning or some of their exams at a different time or a different location. So it would depend on the individual, but I think it's really just about having understanding and starting some conversations about what are the needs to help be supportive for the individual, but obviously not in a way that's going to create more burden or challenges for the school, but rather create some partnership where everyone can benefit.
Yeah, definitely good advice there. And, education is always the best tool. But it looks like we're out of time. But thanks so much, Jerry, for being with us for this very informative discussion on Tourette's syndrome. And all the best to you and your family, of course.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It was wonderful to be here, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, of course. Jerry Firth is the coordinator of the annual Trek for Tourette fundraiser for the Lethbridge Tourette Group. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.